Oh, hey, CNFers, you know this show takes a lot of time, and part of what keeps the lights on here at CNF Pod HQ is if you consider hiring me to edit your work or coach you through some of your work. A generous editor helps you see what you can't see. It could be a pitch, a proposal, an essay, maybe something as ambitious as a book. If you need help cracking the code, man, you can email me at creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com, and we can start a dialogue. And there's also patreon.com/CNFpod. For a few bucks a month, you help support the show and be part of a cool community of nonfiction writers. Depending on your tier, you get some face-to-face time with me to talk things out. Sometimes you just need to talk it out, man.
You see a standard set and you try to reach that standard, and you know you're probably going to fall short. You try to get as close to it as humanly possible.
What a treat. What a treat today. We have New York Times best-selling author Ian O'Connor, longtime sports journalist, sports columnist for outlets like ESPN.com and the New York Daily News, among others. Ian is the author of several biographies, on Coach Krzyzewski, Coach K, Bill Belichick, Derek Jeter, and now his latest, Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. It's published by Mariner Books. For those who are not American football savvy, Rodgers is a Super Bowl winning quarterback, spent many years playing for the Green Bay Packers. And he was traded to New York Jets, and he got injured 4 plays into the 2023 season. In his first start for his new team, hurt his Achilles tendon. He might have the most arm talent of any quarterback to play the game, and he is no doubt an interesting, thoughtful person. What drives me nuts about him is I feel like he needs to be the smartest person in the room, or he wants you to know he is. Most notably, when asked if he was vaccinated against the COVID-19 coronavirus, he said, "Yeah, I've been immunized." Nobody followed up because a room full of sports writers and not epidemiologists will likely pick up on the difference between vaccination and immunization. And he went from one of the more celebrated athletes in the country to kind of an arrogant jerk overnight, a villain. Ian treats his subject with the utmost fairness, and it's a tremendous feat of writing and reporting. You read the book, and you're like, oh my God, this is such an awesome dude. And in another chapter, you're like, holy shit, this guy's kind of an asshole. And the next chapter, you're like, wow, this guy's an amazing person. And then the next chapter is like, oh, wow, he's kind of a dick. And you go back and forth like that the whole time. You're like, wow, this guy is just incredibly human. And it's a real testament to what Ian was able to do and how he handled the story. It's an amazing book. I complained that I had only 14 months to do my Prefontaine biography, and Ian did this one in, about a year. And he spoke with far more people than I did. You can't compare methodologies to books. Different subject matters account for different metrics. It's still amazing what he was able to do in a year. Incredible. Show notes to this episode and more. New blog posts, my internet garden, if you will, are at BrandonO'Mara.com. Hey, there you can also subscribe to my monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. Book recommendations, cool links, good vibes, man. First of the month, no spam. As far as I can tell, can't beat it. Talk to somebody else. They might be like, yeah, you can beat it. But not me. Ian O'Connor talks about the best way to ask a writer you admire for a blurb, why he needs a window in his writing space, and the difference between authorized and unauthorized biographies, and which one, in his opinion and mine, is the best. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get right after it right now, CNFers. All right? I should add that when I recorded this interview with Ian, it was when I had pretty much lost my voice. And Ian's audio isn't the warmest or the tightest. It could be a little hard to hear. Not every connection is great. A lot of that has to do with sometimes internet or microphone tech, stuff of that nature. So we're just going to have to roll with it. The content of the conversation is such that I hope that the audio doesn't really matter because it's good stuff. It's good stuff. 3, 2, 1, riff. what does your workspace look like, or your ideal workspace, so you can really kind of lock in and get in the zone?
Yeah, I have a home office, and basically it's a converted small bedroom, and I always feel like it's important to have windows that I'm looking out of while I'm working at the same time. I feel like when I'm staring at a wall, that can be distracting, and I do feel like I need windows. I don't know why that
Yeah.
is when I'm writing, but I do occasionally like to peek outside and see what's going on. And yeah, it's a small room, and I usually do my best work at night, late at night when everyone's in bed and the house is quiet, and that's usually when I do a fair amount of my writing when I'm working on a book. And during the day, really mostly reserved for reporting time, just calling as many people as humanly possible who have any connection to the subject. So that's my process. It's not a terribly profound process, but that's so far what's pretty much worked for me.
Yeah, in talking with Andre Debus the third, like his thing is he has like a bunker in his house, and it's everything's lit up except maybe just like a little lamp. It almost looks like an interrogation room, and and so he doesn't want any exterior distractions. And I imagine like something like that would get like claustrophobic for someone like yourself who at least needs some ambient light and a way to avert your eyes to something other than a wall or your screen.
Yeah, a lot of people on my block they walk their dogs and they go for bike rides. I live on a circle, so we have a bit of an oval. So, although I think a lot of people would find that distracting if you're trying to be locked in writing a book, sometimes I just need a break and just look outside and do some people watching. I need that, and I could not. I don't think I could do it in a room with just four walls and no windows. I think that would drive me
Right.
insane. And again, at night is really, and I think that comes from most of my career. I was a sports columnist,
Yep.
and I was just so used to writing on deadline after night games that I that's when my energy really kicked in for most of my career, and so that still holds true. I think I really do my best work at night, and so that frees me up. And during the day, of course, that's when people are available to be called and to talk about whatever subject you're working on. So yeah, I try to do hundreds of interviews and then piece them together. Obviously, use the best anecdotes, and really a book to me about. I've generally done unauthorized biographies of major sports figures, and books are really a series of hopefully very interesting anecdotes that you're weaving a narrative thread through, and and that's how I go about it.
Oh, that's great. And yeah, you brought up a few threads there that I have in my notes, but I'll tug on the authorized versus unauthorized
Yeah.
aspect of it. And it's for people who might not understand what one is versus the other, or the benefits of one versus the other. You just maybe explain a bit about the dichotomy between the two, and what is preferred, and given your experience.
Well, I could say, Brendan, just this is just my opinion.
Yeah.
The preferable way of doing it is unauthorized, and it's funny because a lot of people think that's a dirty word.
Right.
They see unauthorized and they think it's a trashy book, and no, it just means that you are not working as part of a collaboration with the subject, and so it's really it's certainly more it's pure journalism. And now I'm not knocking the collaborative approach. There's certainly a great redeeming value to that as well. But my preference is to do unauthorized biographies. I've never done a collaboration. I may do one soon. I'd actually like to try that and just see what it's like. From the outside looking in, it looks like it would be somewhat easier, although there is nothing easy about doing a book.
Right.
And I think you know that. And so but an unauthorized biography is my cup of tea. And I obviously, at the start of the process, I inform the subject that I'm doing this. There's nothing secret about it. I'm very transparent. And for instance, when I started an unauthorized biography of Derek Jeter, I was a columnist in New York. I knew him. We had a professional relationship that was pretty good. I basically covered his entire career, not as a beat writer, but as a columnist in New York. So when I decided to do the unauthorized biography, uh, the Yankees were in spring training, and on my own dime, I hopped on a plane to Tampa, and I wanted to tell him to his face. I didn't want him to hear it through the grapevine that I was about to start this project or that I was in the middle of doing it. So I went up to his locker and talked to him and told him, I said, I just came down here to tell you that I'm doing this. And he asked me why, and he said, hey, my career's not over yet. And I said, no, but you're about to become the first Yankee ever to get 3,000 hits. And I think this is the right time to do it. So he ended up cooperating to some degree. He didn't give me a big 5-hour sit down, but he said he would talk to me at his locker like he would during the normal course of business in a season. And he did do that. Yeah, I think it's important to tell your subject right away and not let that person hear it from somebody else. So when Aaron Rodgers was traded from Green Bay to the Jets at his introductory press conference, that's when I told him, because I didn't really want to hear it from somebody else. So I think that's important. And also, when I'm done with the book, the first copy I hand somebody, I want that somebody to be the subject of the book.
Oh yeah, it's a good call.
So,
When you're dealing with the people you work with are high profile public figures, and it got me thinking about, and you're alluding to it already, is what permission you need, or like what permission do you need to proceed in some way.
right.
Not that you need the green light from, say, Jeter or Rogers, but there is a certain element of, like you said, like, I don't want you to be blindsided, but this is what I'm doing. And I guess sometimes you can also run the risk of them stonewalling certain people you want to talk to. Again, I imagine you've run into that countless times.
Yeah, I have. Bill Belichick was classic. He was actively recruiting people not to talk to him. And people are surprised to learn that you don't need somebody's permission, public figure's permission, to do a book on that person.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to write a book on Donald Trump, you don't have to ask permission. You just do the book and hope that he doesn't block people from talking to you, and hope that he talks to you too. And again, and I didn't really fully answer your question about authorized versus unauthorized. An authorized biography, you're telling that person's story, that person's truth as he or she sees it. That's why I prefer the unauthorized biography, because I just think it's closer to a pure form of journalism, as opposed to just telling that person's truth.
Right.
And so, but I do see, listen, there have been some great collaborations that I've read that are just fantastic and have tremendous value. And I do plan at some point in doing one of those, hopefully. But if I have my druthers, it's to go this route I've gone with Belichick, Coach K at Duke, Jeter, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and now Aaron Rodgers.
Right. And speaking of someone who does some of the most brilliant unauthorized journalistic biographies, is someone you deeply admire, and David Marinus. And you wrote on your website that he wrote one of your favorite books, and I wonder what that title is and what about it inspired you.
So it was a biography of Vince Lombardi, When Pride Still Mattered. Probably my favorite sports book of all time. Vince Lombardi, are you familiar with Lombardi?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so obviously the Super Bowl trophy is named after him. He won 5 championships with the Green Bay Packers. He grew up in Brooklyn. He actually coached at my high school in Englewood, New Jersey, St. Cecilia High School. And when he was the coach there in the 40s, St. Cecilia was the #1 high school football team in America. And Vince Lombardi lived 8 houses from my childhood house in Englewood, New Jersey. And so I was always fascinated by him. And that book was tremendous. And Marinus, of course, has done a number of tremendous books. And yeah, so it's also, I find those books to be inspiring. And you see a standard set and you try to reach that standard, and you know you're probably going to fall short. You try to get as close to it as humanly possible. J.R. Moringer is another brilliant writer and has done a lot of collaborative works that are the charts great. And again, that's a standard that you try to reach as an author, and it's extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to get there, at least if you're me. But that's the goal, to try to reach as high as and get as close as you possibly can.
Yeah, and on your blog, when you had a screenshot of the blurbs for Belichick, and you wrote, Marinus, Shaughnessy, and Wojnarowski, people you deeply admired, blurb the book, and blurbing is, yeah, everyone is busy and it's time consuming, and you always want to like knock on someone's door you admire to blurb your book, and I wonder, just through your experience, and I imagine asking for blurbs and then being asked, I imagine countless times, is like, how do you begin to ask people for blurbs, and maybe what's the wrong way to ask someone for a blurb?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the wrong way is to expect an answer, and to expect an answer to be yes.
Yeah.
I go in with no expectation when I ask someone, and I'll write a note, an email, and I think this is the right way to do it. And just and say, I'd be honored if you did this, but I understand how busy authors are and how busy you are. And I would take absolutely no offense if you need to take a pass. I understand. So either way, it's no problem at all if you can't do it. And so to me, that's the right way to go about it, where you have no expectation and you let that person you're asking know that it's perfectly okay to say no. And I try to always say yes. I don't know if I've ever said no. If I did, it was one or two times where I really didn't even have the time to do that. And often people would say, well, what's it going to take? 27 seconds to put together three sentences? No, but you have to read some of the chapters. And generally, when you're blurbing, you're not reading the entire book. That people don't have time to do that.
Right.
So this is how I would do it. If I get a yes, I would then send that person. Sometimes I'll send, if I have a PDF of the entire book. I understand you don't have time to read the whole thing, but chapters 1, 7, and 13 are of particular interest, and I think capture the essence of this book if you get a chance to read those. And that's how I approach it, but very gently when I'm asking, because it's a big ask. So I try to return that favor, and I don't know if I've ever said no. I can't rule it out. But if I did, it was just because I absolutely could not devote any time to it.
You already talked about this, about when you pick a subject and you're like, step one. I was going to ask you what step one is, but it's telling them that you're going to do the project. So what's then like steps 2 and 3, and maybe your first 5 phone calls as as you want to gather all that information?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with Jeff Pearlman.
Oh, nice.
About the process, and it's almost maybe people would look at it as too formulaic, but generally speaking, with my books, I start with the present day introduction of some sort, something very current, and then start from the beginning of that life, and really sort of deliver a chronological narrative on that person's life. And a lot of writers and authors hate that approach and just don't do it that way. But to me, I just feel that's the best way to go about it. I've yet to find a better way, but that's just me. And so oftentimes I'll start my reporting the same way at the beginning of that person's life, and try to find elementary school teachers, and obviously try to talk to relatives who were there during childhood, and friends who grew up with that person. And so again, it's not terribly profound, that way of going about it, but that's my approach. And so, and I do tell the subject I'm about to do this, so I guess I'm giving that person a heads up that if he or she wants to start calling people to warn them not to talk to me, they have that opportunity, and I'll deal with it. I feel like there are people who initially said no, then called back later and said yes, and I have a very gentle approach, and I feel like nobody owes me anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I go into a phone call. That the person I'm calling has no idea I'm a stranger and I'm doing this project. It's not a collaborative work. So, and they usually ask that question. Okay, does Aaron Rodgers know you're doing this? Yes. Okay. Is he working with you on it? Is this his book with you, or is this just your book? No, no, no. It's an independent project. It's just my book. Okay. So they have to make a decision then. And like in the case of Belichick and Aaron Rodgers, two very polarizing figures, and Jeter, because Derek Jeter was a very private, distant guy. I got a lot of, well, I need to contact Derek Jeter, Aaron Rodgers, or Bill Belichick. And if they say okay, then I'll do it. So sometimes they said okay, and sometimes they didn't say okay. So if I never heard from that person again, I figured they didn't get the okay. I don't always stick to this religiously, but my reporting process mirrors my writing process in the book, and that is start with the subject's youth and report in chronological order.
And how long does it take you typically to find the through line in the narrative or the wireframe on which you can hang the narrative of a book?
I would say maybe when I'm 100 interviews in,
Mm-hmm.
I'll see it. And I usually do between 225 and 375 interviews for these books. And I would say, yeah, 100 interviews in, I think I have it. I think I have a good sense of
it. And yeah, and does the interviewing reveal the narrative more than, say, the newspaper archive?
100%. Yeah. I think both help, but certainly the stories you're getting from the people who were there, and sometimes the printed accounts aren't entirely accurate and they're incomplete. And but the human beings who were there on the ground witnessing this person's life as it unfolded, to me, that's where you're always getting the best stuff. And sometimes, particularly with very private figures, and those are the figures I've really profiled in these books. Let's say Belichick, for instance. Tom Brady and another, the stars of his program, his team, they're going to be a little hesitant to talk to me because a lot of those players and former players still have relationships with either Belichick or the New England Patriots. They might be employed by the Patriots still. And so they have something to lose. And so you might not get cooperation at all from those people, or they might not tell you the full story because they're concerned about the implications for them when they see it in print. There are bottom of the roster, middle of the roster players, and Belichick coached there for more than 2 decades, that were in the same meetings with Tom Brady, heard the same stories, have witnessed the same events, and they only played 1 or 2 years with the Patriots, 2 or 3 years in the NFL. Then they had to get real jobs in the real world, and they've been forgotten by Belichick and everyone else. But they're out there working in offices again in the real world and not the fantasy world of sports. So a lot of times I find that those people are the most valuable because they speak freely. They don't have a paid gig with the New England Patriots or New York Yankees anymore. So a lot of times the best material in my books comes from those people who weren't there. They weren't stars. They weren't there for 15 years. It was brief, but they witnessed and heard the same things that Bill Belichick said in those meetings, and or that Derek Jeter did in the clubhouse in the talk before a big game, or something to that effect. So I guess it's the old story of Jimmy Breslin interviewing the gravedigger at JFK's memorial service.
Yeah.
And it's always looking for that person.
Oh, and just for fun, I have included in the show notes a pointer.org story that analyzes Jimmy Breslin's Gravedigger column from the JFK funeral. So, fun thing to check out if you want to explore it more.
Who had a role, a profound one, but was very likely overlooked by everyone else, at least in my profession. I'm fairly certain it was Breslin who did that column on the person digging into the ground a hole for the president's casket, and and that's always been in the back of my head when I start a book, is to find those people, and I think that they are just more willing to give you a full picture of what happened.
Oh, for sure. What a great North Star that is to find those people, and there are quite literally hundreds of them, especially in more the contemporary biographies that you traffic in, because most people are most likely alive that you're talking to.
Well, and I think you might have gotten this or found this with Prefontaine, but sometimes you call these people and they think it's a practical joke. Well, they haven't been talked to. Nobody's been looking for them for years and years, and I only played a season and a half with whatever organization it was. Like, why are you calling me? Well, you were right there too. You witnessed this just like Derek Jeter or Tom Brady did, and why wouldn't I call you? So, but I've gotten a lot of that from
Yeah.
people, figures like that, where they got the message, they thought it was a prank, they didn't know whether or not to call me back. They had to Google me to see that I was legitimate,
Right.
somewhat legitimate anyway. So I don't know if you've had that experience, but I've had that a lot.
Oh, for sure. I wouldn't say practical joke, but I've caught some people so off guard. They're like, "Oh my God, how did you find me?" And
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, and it's yeah, one.
It's a lot easier today than when I'm older than you. I'm going to be 60 in a couple of weeks, but uh, before the internet, it was a lot harder to find people.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, that dovetails nicely into another question about, in the absence of saying, say a source, you're like, oh, who are the five people I'd like, I should contact, and they give you contact info or whatever. Um, what's your go-to resource for finding phone numbers or emails? Because this is the crux of it, and it can be, you got to do some detective work.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as whitepages.com. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you find numbers that you're surprised that they exist on something called whitepages.com.
Yeah. Another resource is fastpeoplesearch.com. Now, the contact info isn't always up to date or relevant, but oftentimes it'll get you a phone number that's at least close, or I might misreference someone and you get a family member, and it works. It's a bit arduous, but it works. And you can also remove your name from that database too. So don't tell your sources that, but if you don't want to be on there, get your name off of there, but lean on it for when you're looking to find some of those diamonds in the rough.
Or I'll go to Nexus, LexisNexis.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to if you Google, there are all these different phone sites now with numbers, and I'm willing to call five or six wrong numbers to finally get to an existing number. You have to be willing to have people just hang up on
Yeah.
you, or even curse at you for with the wrong number of call, and I am willing to go through that experience. It's not fun.
Right.
I hate to bother people. It's not like I want to bother you, but I really, really, really want to find this human being. I'm willing to put up with that. And so you have to be willing to go through some of that shit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's so,
To
some of the dead numbers you call and you reach one voicemail, because they almost always goes right to voicemail, because they're like, who the hell is this anonymous person calling me? And often the numbers I come across, it might actually be the 50-year-old son of a 75-year-old person I'm trying to get in touch with. You're like, hey, this is his son, but I'll put you in touch with him, or
that's beautiful. I'm thrilled when I get those
yeah.
messages. And it's like, hey, I'm sorry I bothered you because you're not the person, but you're related to the person, and now you're going to connect me with the subject or whoever you're trying to reach. And that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I imagine with the Aaron Rodgers book, because you tabled a current LeBron book for this right around the
Mm-hmm.
time of the trade and then Rodgers' injury, and I was kind of like just doing the math on the runway that you had to report, research, and craft this book, and I don't know, I'm ballparking maybe 9 months. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a pretty short runway.
It turned into a
Okay.
year because I had to go back into it. Now, I had handed in the manuscript in January, and then, and he hadn't talked to me. Obviously, I had made a whole bunch of requests from March going forward, and I didn't know if he'd ever talk to me. I thought when he got injured, that would improve my chances because now he's not playing, and yeah, he's going to be doing rehab. But I just thought there'd be more opportunities to maybe fly out to California, watch a rehab session, and talk to him because he wasn't playing. That didn't happen. He never said yes or no. He just through the Jets, I kept getting just a whole bunch of nothingness and indifference and non-answers. So it looked like he was just choosing not to talk to me and without giving me a definitive no. So, but in February, I get a call from the Jets that Aaron's now willing to talk to you. Okay. So obviously, I call my editor, and this is a Mariner book too, by the way. So this is a Mariner book, and so I call Peter Hubbard, and yeah, he goes, obviously you have to go back into it. So I fly out to Los Angeles. There's a bomb scare on my plane on the way out there. We have to land in Chicago. They have to check the plane for like 7, 8 hours. And then we actually got cleared to take off again and go to Los Angeles, go to Malibu where he lives. And so obviously I would have loved 15 hours with the guy to talk about his entire life. But I had told the Jets, even if you gave me an hour, I'll fly to California for that. I would have gone for 40 minutes. So when I got to his house, I had no idea how long he was going to give me. So I had to pick and choose, okay, what do I need to ask him? And I had to throw some things overboard that I would have loved to have asked him about. But I figured I have an hour. And if he gets sick of me after 50 minutes, he's probably going to ask me to leave.
Yeah.
So I had to pick and choose and prioritize. And it turns out he gave me 2 hours. And I could tell at the end of the second hour, he was, you just know when a subject is done, and he was getting, his answers were getting shorter, and he was kind of fidgeting. And okay, so I got 2 hours of, really, it was a fact checking session as opposed to a real in depth interview about his life. And but he made the book better, and so I very much appreciated that. But then I go back, redo the book, hand it in the second time. And then he did some podcasts where he went on and on about some conspiracy theories. And I'm trying to, and that was like in March. I'm trying to remember. So after I sat with him too, the RFK Jr. VP story breaks. And then CNN broke a story hitting him with that Sandy Hook conspiracy theory story. So all kinds of things happened, and I kept having to update the book, and I didn't have access to him anymore. He didn't respond. I tried to re-engage him, and I didn't get anywhere with it. So the book kept being reopened, and I kept having to move more material back into it and write new material about some of the conspiracy theories. And I'm trying to remember when the Jimmy Kimmel thing was. And I think that was more towards the end of the football season. It's in the book. But anyway, so I was still working on it and revising it in March, April. So it turned into a year process. Now, usually my books are it's a 2 year process. Belichick was really more 3. And of course, Aaron hasn't been on the planet as long as some of the people I profiled in the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. I wanted this book to come out while he was still playing.
Yeah.
And there's a possibility this would be his final year. I think he'll actually play one more. But particularly after the injury, I thought that we need to have this book come out for this season. And so I left my job at the New York Post. I was a columnist there, sports columnist. And so for the first time, I worked on a book where I didn't have another job. Every other book I did, I was working for ESPN or New York Daily News or Gannett and USA Today. And that was a challenge in and of itself because it was like having 2 full-time jobs. But I felt confident I could do the same kind of thorough job on this book in a shorter period of time because I was not working a day job anymore.
There's a moment. It's actually towards the end of the book, which I think is a really telling anecdote. When Rogers he dresses as John Wick for Halloween, and you wrote like of Wick, was he a good guy, bad guy, anti-hero? Who the hell was this guy? When he was out of costume, that's referring to Rogers, and you're like, and what exactly was behind that mask that he often refused to wear? And I thought that really, in a lot of ways, sums up the subtitle of this book, which is this guy is kind of an enigma. He is a bit of a mystery. And what was it like for you just through the process of your research and your rigor of trying to peel back that onion to try to get to the core of it as best you could?
Yeah, I would say it was the most challenging task I've had in trying to answer those questions. With Belichick, there was a mystery about him. He was a distant figure, but I also thought at the same time he was the same character through his entire coaching career. Aaron Rodgers actually was a good guy. He was one of the good guys until August of 2021 when he said, "Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
immunized." That those words changed his whole public life. Up until that point, he was considered one of the more socially aware players in the NFL. And he supported Colin Kaepernick in his right to protest. He supported players who were kneeling uh, during the anthem. He rebuked a fan during the national anthem. He yelled at an anti-Muslim slur. I believe that was after the terrorist attack in Paris. And President Obama thanked him for doing that. He so and he supported and was involved with legitimately charitable cause supporting victims of the war in Congo. And I just wondered how many athletes really did that and things like that, and how many white athletes said, "Yeah, Colin Kaepernick was kept out of the league by the
right.
owners because of his stance." So he was really looked at as one of the good guys in the NFL and in sports in general. And then he became a villain, just like that. That sequence, August 2021, saying he's been immunized and basically misleading everyone in the room and people who listen around the country. And then in November, it turns out he's not vaccinated and he has COVID, and now he's got to explain it. That changed his whole image and the course of his public life. Ever since then, he's not been looked at as one of the good guys in sports. It's been the opposite. I found it very challenging. Obviously, the estrangement from his family, which to me seems like should have been solved or ended years ago. There are still family members who don't know exactly why the estrangement exists, including his parents. They're not sure why.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it was more a death by a thousand cuts as opposed to some singular reason why that estrangement exists and why there is, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a moment last summer at Lake Tahoe between Aaron and his father. Did you remember seeing that in the book?
Oh yes.
Like,
Yep.
okay, so they hug, they have an emotional "I love you." The father's crying. It's brief. I don't know if it might have been 15, 20 seconds, but it's the only time I was struck by Ed Rodgers, the father, saying to me that because he was looking for his son. I think Aaron had just played the ninth hole of that golf course, and he was following his son. He was hoping for a moment with him, but he lost him from him. He lost where he was. And then he turned, and there Aaron was standing, I don't know, 15 feet away from him, looking at him. And he said, "I froze because it had been so long since we looked at each other that I didn't even know how to act or what to say." But I found that to be a pretty powerful scene and moment, and perhaps suggesting that Aaron is trying to find a way back. I think that was the first baby step towards that. And I think the road to reconciliation is going to run through his father. His father was his idol and his hero. He said that when he was younger, and likely the family member he has the least issues with. So I'm hopeful. I'd love to see that happen. But if it does happen, it will be Aaron and his father first coming together, and then see about everybody else.
Yeah. Of the island is one of the more riveting chapters that you wrote, and it's like you kind of teased this estrangement and that you alluded to there with the Tahoe thing early in the book, and then come chapter 10, about at least with my galley, 273 pages in, we kind of get to the crux of how you get exiled. And it was pretty riveting stuff. And I wonder, just, he can explain the island because his parents aren't the only one on there. And and how people get there, and can they get off? Because someone did get off the island.
If you, yes, Jordan Russell, his best friend. If you wrong Aaron Rodgers, you're going to end up on that island, and you may never get parole. He is, I mean, Jeter was like that too. One slight, you might not get a second chance. He might be done with you. With Aaron Rodgers, you could be dead to him after one misstep. And it might not even be a misstep, but it's a misstep in his
Yeah.
eyes. That's what matters. Um, yeah, and again, there wasn't one reason, and there were family members who were still baffled by it. And the crux of it really is, and there's a lot of his or her own truth in this drama. There's a lot of he said, and he said, she said. I think the parents, start with parents, they did not like Olivia Munn at all, and she did not like
Mm-hmm.
him, and Olivia Munn, the actress. And so, starting back in December of 2014, the parents visit Aaron in Green Bay. Everything seemed fine for the most part, and they made plans to see him play at Tampa Bay at Christmas time. And Aaron then has this dreadful game at Buffalo right after that, the worst passer rating in his career. And that evening, Munn calls his parents, who are back in Chico, California, and tells them she doesn't want them going to Tampa to see her boyfriend. She doesn't want them around. And they claim they have no idea why she felt that way. It was an angry phone call. They were blindsided by it. And I asked them, when you were with them in Green Bay, did you make a disparaging remark of some sort? And they said, no, we did not. And so um, that contentious phone call really initiates a period of nearly 10 years where Aaron has virtually no contact with his family. The parents blame Olivia, but both Aaron and Olivia, now Olivia didn't talk to me for the book, but she talked to Andy Cohen. And that was an interview she gave some years ago. And she said that both Aaron, and Aaron confirmed this to me, say that his problem with his family existed before he started dating her. I mean, as far as his parents are concerned, and Aaron, I think religion was a part of it. For example, Darla, his mother, is very religious, particularly, and she's opposed to premarital sex. And she was really upset when Munn would talk publicly about her sex life, even jokingly. And she was even opposed to Aaron sharing a room with her or any girlfriend, even after he had been in the NFL for years, and that really bothered him. Aaron told me there are issues he just did not want to discuss for public consumption, but but religion was, I think, a bigger part of it years ago. But his mother really being strict in that context, that he had an issue with that. Another part of it was his feeling that family members were taking his generosity for granted and were too eager to capitalize on his fame. And I had some quotes in the book that I think really sort of capture the way Aaron felt, including one from Jordan Russell, his best friend, who ended up exiled on the island for a number of years. And all of a sudden, one day out of the blue, Aaron called him and said, I want you back in my life. And Russell just said, hey, I demand your respect. If I'm coming back, I need your respect. Aaron promised he would give him that, and they reunited. But Jordan Russell said, if Aaron feels his family or other people in his life have laid claim to something based on his efforts, Aaron will then go out of his way to make sure they earn their own way. And I think that's a very telling quote, and he knows Aaron as well as anyone. And I think his JUCO coach at Butte, Craig Rigsby, is still very close to him. And I know I have a quote in the book where he says people were hanging on his coattails and trying to take advantage of him. He wasn't naming names, but it's clear he's talking about family members particularly. And he's close to the family. And he said that he took care of, he got tired of taking care of people. And he said that his two brothers, one time, that he got on their ass because they were saying some negative things about Aaron to Craig, who doesn't get involved in the family drama because he has good relationships with everyone in the family. But he said there was this one time I think they were out and Luke and Jordan were talking shit about Aaron, and he basically said, "That's enough. I don't say that shit in public. Don't be talking about it now either." So Craig Rigsby was a big believer in Aaron and how generous he had been. He had bought his parents a brand new house, built them the house, and that he did a lot for his brothers too. And he just felt that Aaron wasn't being appreciated, and that Aaron felt that way at the same time. So it's a mess. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it's a living organism that should have been killed off like 6 or 7 years ago. And I just think Aaron doesn't know how to kill it. And it's easier to just let it fester and go on forever than to actually confront it and end it. Because some of the things that like his older brother he claimed did that bothered him are silly. And a lot of it seems silly to me, even if he's got a couple of other issues that perhaps are a little more troubling that he doesn't want to talk about. I don't know what they are. I just think there's no way this should be a near 10-year estrangement based on everyone I talked to, including his aunts who were close to him when he was a kid. His grandmother, she couldn't speak on the phone, but she sent me a lengthy email, answer the questions. And the friends who were close to him, Jordan Russell even saying, yeah, this should be over. Does the punishment here really fit the crime? This was that part of it too. And I talked to a lot of people who never talked before about it publicly. But a lot of those people, a number of those people still don't know exactly why the estrangement still exists.
Right. And what's wild about the arc of his career also, here is someone who has no scholarship offers, has to go to a he has asked to sit out a year by a potential Division III coach, and then he goes to junior college. He plummets down the draft board, and yet he still has this belief in himself to endure all that. And I think of just as a writer or a journalist, it's like if you're trying to plug your way and move your way up the ranks, and you just keep hitting the wall, and you're not getting hired or getting fired or cut or whatever. Eventually, you just say like, I guess I'm just not good enough, and you resign yourself to something else. But with all that evidence coming at him, he still had belief in himself. And I just wonder what you make of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because in high school, in senior year, he went back to play baseball. He was a great young baseball player. His father thought he was going to be a major leaguer. But once he got into high school, he left baseball and focused on football. He played, I believe, 1 year of basketball, but then just focused on football. But his senior year, after he got no scholarship offers after his senior year of football, or senior season, the baseball coach, Ron Souza, convinces him to play baseball for his senior season. And Aaron says in the book that gave me my confidence back as an athlete to get back on the mound, strike out a lot of people. It just lit a fire inside of me again, competitive fire that had been extinguished by colleges ignoring me during my senior season of football. And I think Craig Rigsby saved his ass. I think Rigsby lived, didn't even know it, but he lived a few houses away from him, behind him, a short walk to their house for his recruiting visit, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
And but to convince him, and Darla was like, yeah, my son's got a 1310 on his SATs. He's not going to community college. And Rigby's like, no, you don't understand. Like, we're going to send him to a Division I school quickly. We're going to give him that platform. He's a Division I player, but he needs to go this route. We'll take care of him. We'll make it happen. And he did. Yeah, you have to give him a lot of credit because he was completely overlooked at pretty much every step of the way. And I was sitting in his backyard in Malibu, where the Pacific Ocean is basically his backyard. We're sitting on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And he bought that house for around, I have it in the book, it was 2019. Might have been 2019, but for $28 million. And he made it clear to me he didn't buy it with Danica Patrick, as was reported. Yeah. He bought it. It was his money. He wanted me to know that. But I felt like, this is pretty impressive. This guy who didn't have any scholarship offers, was playing in a nowhere place in Northern California where no recruiters ever went. Nobody ever went north of Sacramento. And he became one of the all-time greats in the NFL, really through the singular force of his will. And he doesn't really get a lot of credit for that. I think in part because Brady won 7 Super Bowls and he only won 1, and his postseason record is a little spotty. But man, when you think of where he came from and what he achieved, a 4-time NFL MVP, and let's face it, if he had Belichick as his coach, he'd have multiple Super Bowls. I'm not saying he'd have 7 or 6 that Brady won. Brady won with Belichick, but he'd have 3 or 4 if he had that system and that offensive coordinator, Daniels and all that. I really believe that. He didn't have a terrible coach, but he had coaches who were better than average and nothing more than that. So I think that is an overlooked part of his story, that this is a self-made man who deserves a lot of credit for what he achieved in the NFL.
I love the anecdote from his friend Michaela in high school where, she said he took notes on himself, he criticized himself, he looked at his strong points and his weak points. He was a student of the game even then. And I love that degree of personal inquiry, of interrogating not only your strengths, but to try to level up your weak points as well. And I think that's very telling. And I think a lot of us can learn to do that degree of self-inquiry into our own professions.
And a guy who never went out drinking, really never. In junior college, might play a late night game of poker with his friends on the team, but just was just so committed to being a success in his chosen field. And yeah, I don't think he gets credit for that either. His work ethic is really strong, always has been. I know it's been questioned of late, given that he missed 2 practices to go to Egypt, but I think that speaks to his intellectual curiosity about the world, which I see as positive. And so, but he's a very unique character and very much self-made. I think the NFL, as much as he's a lot of his wounds in recent years are self-inflicted. I certainly admit that. But the NFL, and I close the book with this line for a reason, is a far more interesting place with him than not in it. He is, I think, the best interview in the league. He is, even if you don't agree with a lot of what he's saying, he is a very engaging, thoughtful talker and thinker. And he can fill it up like very few who I've covered over the years in the NFL. And he's a content machine.
Yeah.
You have to admit that. And so this will be a fascinating season because of the waste of last year, and this might be his last best chance to win another ring. So if he could ever do that for the New York Jets, a Charlie Brown franchise like the Jets, what that would do for his legacy, I think we can't even doubt.
Yeah. You write late in the book too that he played all of 4 plays last year, but he was still the most talked about player in the NFL, like his own news cycle. It's really that really speaks to his influence in the game, and to your point of the league is far more interesting with him in it, like him or hate him.
Yeah, I don't know, Brendan, if you watch ESPN in the morning ever, but during training camp, all they do is talk about Aaron Rodgers. Now they talk about the Dallas Cowboys and Dak Prescott because it's America's team. Aaron Rodgers gets talked about more than anyone else, maybe in pro sports right now in this country. And so, yeah, he can roll out of bed and create a news cycle like that. And that's one of the reasons why I did this book. And sometimes when you see what comes out of his mouth, you wish he did not create that news cycle. And he's reckless with his words, like he was on the McAfee show. He did not go on that show intending to suggest that Jimmy Kimmel was on the Epstein list. But his good friend and co-host, the McAfee co-host, AJ Hawk, blurted out something about Epstein's list, and then Aaron got reckless with his words and the way he was trying to get back at Kimmel for mocking him in the past. And he put himself in a hole. And 9 out of 10 listeners who had no idea that Kimmel had mocked him in the past came away believing, and rightfully so, that Rodgers just suggested Kimmel was going to be on the Epstein list. And then when Aaron tried to recover from that and explain it days later, he'd already lost. Once you try to explain something, you know how it is
Yeah.
today. You've lost. It's gone. The moment's gone. And so he has inflicted some of these wounds on himself, and that's just part of who he is.
Something you said a moment ago, especially regarding the island, about how kind of unapologetic Rodgers is, uncompromising, and it's very similar to Coach K, who's someone who had struggles apologizing, admitting his wrongs,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and I just see, okay, there's in terms of like your body of work, all right, there's one uncompromising, unapologetic guy, and then here's another one, and Belichick's his own beast. And it's like, what is the through line that you're seeing in the people that you're particularly drawn to biographize?
I think it's a great question, Brendan. I think to be an all-time great, it's very hard and perhaps damaging to admit fault publicly or to say, I'm sorry, I screwed up. Because you have to have such an incredible amount of competitive arrogance to be an all-time great that I think that admitting fault or admitting weakness in any way, particularly publicly, is damaging to that quest. And I really think that's why. When's the last? I mean, I don't know how much of a sports fan you are and what sports you prefer to others, but how many times? And I'm thinking, has Coach K, Bill Belichick, Derek Jeter, and Aaron Rodgers ever said the words "I'm sorry"? At least in a public arena, they just. So there is something to be said for that. I think it's once you admit weakness in any aspect of your life or public life, that is going to be a hurdle that you're now going to have to clear to get to where you need to be in the pursuit of all-time greatness. That's been my feeling with these guys and why they just won't budge.
Right, and you bringing up greatness too. I have one of my questions here I have written down is, you know, it looks inviting, be it social media, TV. You see all the laurels that go with it. But there's a price to greatness, and you've been close to greatness with these figures. And what is the price or the cost that you see imparted on them?
Well, just when you make a mistake, even if you don't say I'm sorry or don't admit that mistake, it's out there for millions and millions and millions of
Yeah,
people to see, and you're mocked now on social media. And frankly, that's not something that Mickey Mantle or Joe DiMaggio ever had to deal with.
yeah,
And they got ripped in 17 daily newspapers in New York City at that time. But outside of that, it was a different animal back then. And so today's athletes, that's the downside. It's the ridicule, the meanness of social media, and people reveling in your downfall. Temporary, even if it's just temporary, the downfall. There's that feeling now that is you wonder if they feel that it's worth it. That sometimes it's not such a bad thing to be an relatively anonymous human being. Of course, the relatively anonymous human beings crave fame and fortune,
right.
and just assume that those are great problems to have, dealing with criticism and mockery on social media, particularly. But yeah, I think sometimes the reverse is true. It's tough out there now. I think it's tougher to fail now for professional athletes and coaches than it's ever been because of social media.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And I also think that I found that, I'll give you an example. The owner of the New York Giants, John Mara, has been around for a long time now. And he's still pretty accessible compared to your average NFL owner. But he used to be extremely accessible. I would walk with him to the parking lot all the time from Giants training camp offices or after games. But even guys like him, because of social media and the constant scrutiny and criticism and the spirited criticism, particularly, they've retreated and they are not, almost to a man or woman, they are not as accessible anymore. And Brian Cashman, general manager of the Yankees. I know I'm giving you New York figures
Oh,
because really all of my career has been in
yeah.
New York. Um, he's not. He's not. I used to talk to him whenever, and now it's tough to get him. And the reason is because they feel like they get burned so much on social media. They don't want to talk as much as they used to because it's a no-win proposition. So yeah, I do think it is. It's just tougher to be a public figure of any sort today, and I think when you ask the price of fame and fortune and greatness today, the first two words that popped into my head were social
Yeah.
media.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I
That's it.
think, and yes, storytellers and journalists suffer as a result as well. And it's like, it almost makes it all the more imperative to go back to a more old school ethos of journalism, of like true door knocking and seeing people face to face, because everything is so almost faceless. And to have a face to face interaction, shake someone's hand, being able to see someone nod, or just have like Howard Bryant would say, he would just sit with Terry Francona sometime and just have a conversation off the record, or the A's manager at one time he was covering. It's just have a conversation off the record, and you're building a relationship that is forged through mutual respect.
Yeah, Brendan and I've talked to some of them passed away, but older journalists who used to travel with teams on planes, and you would just bullshit with guys waiting for a delayed flight or checking into a hotel or in the hotel restaurant having breakfast, and writers would sometimes eat with players or executives or managers and coaches, and none of that happens today.
Yeah,
And when sports journalists had that in, say, the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, it gave the athlete and the coach and the front office executive and team owner a chance to see you as human, just like
yeah,
them. And they don't see that now. It's just they only see you when you're working, when you're wearing a credential around your neck, and when you're looking for something, when you're looking for a story. But that doesn't mean you can't have human interaction. And I think you're right. And I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I think that's what I do as much as possible with my books. And frankly, I was never Hemingway, certainly, but one thing I thought I did better than most sports columnists around America was report.
mm-hmm.
And while writing an opinion, making it an informed opinion, and seeing people face to face, and making that connection, and also being this was my calling card really, is if you rip somebody, you had to be there the next day and face that person, or at least I would never go up to an athlete or a coach and say, hey, what did you think of what I
Yeah,
wrote? But I would make sure I did this with everyone, that the next day that clubhouse was open, that locker room was open, there was a press conference, whatever, that I sat in the line of vision of that person that I had just ripped in my column. And I did that to a T every single time. And I didn't necessarily say something, but I made sure you knew I was there if you needed to try to berate me or whatever you needed. If you had to say something to me. And also, I didn't want to be presumptuous and go up to the figure because I'd be assigning myself greater importance than perhaps I deserve, because maybe that person didn't bother reading the column or didn't give a shit. But I made sure you saw me. So if you had something to say, you couldn't say I was hiding. And that to me was a very important part of the job.
oh, absolutely, yeah. That's such a, and that's just going to, and it has garnered for you certainly. You just more respect in that regard. So yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if you know Gus Johnson, the announcer, mostly basketball, but he's
Oh
done other
yes, oh
sports.
yes, yep,
But I remember doing. I had criticized Charles Oakley of the New York Knicks, who was a pretty intimidating
yeah,
presence, 6'9", and just one of the league's great enforcers. I had criticized him in the New York Daily News column. The next day, in the locker room, waiting at his pregame locker room access, and Gus Johnson comes up to me and said, "Hey, that was a good column. You said it right. Why don't you go up to Oakley, who was standing 10 feet away from me, and ask him if he read it, and tell him what you thought, and tell him why you wrote it." And I said, "No, he sees me. Like, if he cared and read it, I am standing right in front of him. He's got a chance to say something, scream at me, call me over, whatever. But I'm not going up to him and assuming that he read it or cares." about my opinion. So yeah, I would never initiate a confrontation or just a conversation after a negative column, but just be present and have that accountability. And I think that does inspire respect.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and just that your body of work, I think, invites that, and and this new biography is no different. So it's yeah, it's just I want to be mindful of your time, Ian, and this is just such a furtive and wonderful conversation about how you go about writing these biographies and getting to dig into Aaron Rodgers a bit. So just thank you so much for the time and talking shop. This was wonderful.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Brent. It's always great talking to a fellow author and sports writer.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Ian, for coming on the show. That was awesome. Ian O'Connor, Brendan O'Mara, couple Irishmen. Gotta love it. Nice to talk to sports writers. I love talking to sports writers. And a joy to finally have Ian on the show. He's been one of those guys who was like, gotta have this guy on the show. And then lo and behold, get an email from the Mariner Books publicist, Ian O'Connor, new book. I'm like, yes. Let's do this. And I read it fast, and I got him on before he went through his media onslaught, which is kind of ongoing. He was on Dan Patrick show the other day, and he talked about some of the things that we talked about on the show, and we recorded a couple weeks ago, and I heard him talking on Dan Patrick, and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, those are some things that are on my show, and we'll get it. You just didn't you? Don't forget to smash that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app, so you never miss a CNFing podcast. And if my Prefontaine book from the same imprint as Ian's measures up to half of what Ian's accomplished with his Aaron Rodgers book, I'll take that. That'll mean I've written a pretty damn good book. As of this parting shot, still waiting, still floating. I've secured some photo permissions, reread some notes, got to reread some more. You just want to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. Something's always going to fall through the cracks, but you'd hate to go to press and you're like, oh no. And if you have some of those things, you need to be very gentle about folding it in back into the narrative. It's sort of like a souffle where you fold things into a souffle. You don't want to agitate it too much. Otherwise, you might deflate the whole thing. I don't know what else to say that hasn't already been said, up to this point regarding the process of this book. My only hope is that my editor reads this latest iteration and is like, yes, we're very close. We're almost there. It's good. And one more pass and a good line edit. And we can make something great out of this. Something we can feel proud of. Something that could hold up on subsequent reads. I'm not going to go so far as to say stand the test of time, but if you read this in 10 years or in 20 years, I hope it will be like, oh, that's a good book. Kind of like American Prometheus, whenever it came out, 2005 or whatever. I read that recently within the last year, and it's just like, that's an amazing biography. That one will stand the test of time. It has already, and will continue to do so. And I don't think it's asking too much of your own personal ambition to hope that your book feels that way, has that kind of heft. I don't think it might be asking too much, but I think it's okay to shoot for that star. In any case, on an unrelated note, I woke up the other morning with some gum swelling around one of my implant sites. I have 5 implant sites in my mouth. This is my nightmare scenario. I live in terror of infections developing around any of the implants. I had pretty significant oral surgery about 5 years ago and tens of thousands of dollars. Fortunately, I had a benefactor pay for it, and the worry with implants is infection developing around those sites. They are very vulnerable to infection. And the other day, there was extra swelling, and I immediately went into this mild panic because that's what I do. I get it from my mom. We're kind of like hypochondriacs. So you get a little, she would get this little bump on her wrist. She's like, I have cancer. It's cancer. There's no way it's not cancer. And we're like, Mom, it's not cancer. And thank you for that, because now anytime I get so much as a blemish, I'm like, it's got to be cancer. You know what? I complained about this life and now I'm going to die in the next year. Yeah, that's what happens. That's the panic. So in any case, I flossed a little bit more, and I got the water pick out, rinsed with salt water. Blood is never good. Did more salt water, and then this morning on flossing, no blood. There was a little last night, and none this morning. But swelling hasn't returned in full, but it has subsided somewhat. But it's still a little bit there, or maybe I'm just more paranoid or more sensitive to it. If it persists, I'll have to go to the dentist very soon. And odds are they'll say, yeah, it looks like the implant site is developing something and it's starting to fail. And pretty much there's nothing we can do until that bone weakens around the implant. And then we have to remove it. And then your bridge will be toast. And that's just it. It's not like they can, so far as my understanding is, they can't just like inject, I don't know, antibiotic in that area. It's kind of like you develop an infection around your root systems. And they're like, well, you're fucked. That's dentistry. You're screwed. All this is to say, make sure you're flossing, people. Break up those plaque cities, man. You don't want. Plaque is bacteria haven, and your mouth is like Xanadu for bacteria. And it doesn't take much for that shit to cause an infection that might cost you in more ways than one. You didn't think you'd hear about Brendan's dental woes, did you? But you did. I'm so sorry. Stay wild, CNFers, and if you can do, interview. See ya.